Success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success. Greatness will come. Dwayne Johnson. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast? On today's episode, I'm speaking with the owner of a podcast management agency. And not only that, she also hosts her own podcast. You don't want to miss this one because podcasting should perhaps be a part of your business strategy. Let's jump in and talk about it. You have the power to be the boss of your own life. I'm your host, Monica Allen. I'm a wife, mom, entrepreneur, best-selling author, lifelong learner, and your biz bestie. I have a love and passion for all things small business. Growing my own company from $700 to over 7 figures annually, my goal is to bring you inspiration, business-focused topics and tips, encouragement, and a community that helps you launch, grow, and scale your business, whether you are a dreamer, a side hustler, or a seasoned entrepreneur. You are listening to the Become Your Own Boss podcast. Do you have a conference or an event to attend and you just need 1 or 2 shirts to promote your company or brand? Here at Zeus's Closet, where we are like a tattoo shop for your clothes, we've got you covered. With no order minimums on embroidery or direct to garment, you can order just 1 item. Get a polo shirt for a conference or a t-shirt or jersey for a concert. Visit Zeus'sCloset.com for more information. Imagine, after studying long and hard to get your master's in both law and business, but then turning down that dream job, I put that in air quotes, at a big law firm to travel the world. After a year of backpacking and working crappy jobs, my guest today decided it was time to follow her dreams and start her own business. On today's episode, I'm joined by Anne Claessen, CEO and founder of the Podcast Babes, a fully female podcast management and monetization agency. Check out my interview with Anne. Hi, Anne. Welcome to the Become Your Own Boss podcast. I'm so excited to have you with me today.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Monica.
Thank you for being here. And one of my favorite questions that I love to ask entrepreneurs is how they started their businesses. So tell me a little bit about how you got started with Podcast Babes.
Ooh, it was a journey. It was not that I woke up one day and I thought, okay, let's start the Podcast Babes. This was a long time before actually starting it. I actually started as a freelancer. Well, I'll go back a little bit more, actually. I was traveling, running away from my problems at home because I didn't want to start my career in what I studied. So I went traveling, I went backpacking, and I had that point where I was like, I don't want to go home, but I also am running out of money. So I need to find a way to make money online. So I took a course, and one of the modules was podcast management. And when I saw that, I was like, that is a good idea. This is awesome. I want to do this. So I actually started freelancing as a podcast manager. And then slowly, eventually, that became the Podcast Babes. But yeah, it was a whole process before we finally got to where it is now, of course.
Okay. So with podcast management, you are doing what exactly?
Podcast management, it depends who you ask. I will say what we do at the Podcast Babes is we do everything from the moment that podcaster finishes the recording. Our clients, they schedule their interviews with guests or they schedule their own interviews, like solo episodes, they record it, and then they send the audio files to us. And then we do everything from there. So we added the audio. We make sure that there's a nice intro and outro, all the and I don't know, stumbles are edited out. We create show notes, which is the description that comes with the podcast for all the non-podcasters. We make sure that there's like links in there, that it's all really exciting and that everyone thinks, ooh, I want to listen to that episode. We upload it everywhere. We create promotional things for social media, for newsletters. For some clients, we also do video editing when the podcast goes on YouTube. Yeah, so it's actually a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And that is also exactly why I'm not freelancing anymore, because when I was a freelancer, I had to do all of this. And I slowly realized that I'm not good at all of these different things. Like, this is very different jobs. There's audio editing, there is copywriting, you have to be really detail oriented to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks when you're scheduling episodes and all that stuff. I'm good at some of this, but not all of it. So that is why I also made the switch from being a freelance podcast manager to now working with a small team so that we can all do what we're good at.
Right. Which is kind of the entrepreneurial way, right? We go into it and we're wearing a whole bunch of hats, but we're not wearing them all very well.
Yes.
And then we have to bring in some other people to help us actually really level up and get things in order. Yeah, that's great though, that you started it. And tell me, I'm at this point right now where I kind of tell everybody, if you have a business, you should probably also have a podcast. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go on weekly. Maybe, you figure out the consistency that works for you. But I almost look at podcasting as a little bit like a business card, because it really allows you to dive into what it is that you do and your specialty and reach out to potential clients without them feeling like you're trying to sell them. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. The cool thing about podcasting is it's long form content. So that's already great so that people can really get to know you. But then even better is that people can hear your voice. It's actually relatively easy to build trust through a podcast if you compare it to blogging or social media. It's also so much fun. Like as a business owner, it's so much fun. You can speak to all these people who have a different expertise than you, that really you can give your audience so much value. So that is super fun. And I think also you had a really good point on what you just said, that you don't have to podcast weekly. For probably a lot of businesses, it makes a lot of sense to do seasons, for example. And I also do that for my podcast. So the podcast-based podcast is not a weekly show. We have seasons. That means that I played around with this a little bit, but what we found to be kind of the sweet spot is that over 11 weeks, we do release 2 episodes a week. A season is 22 episodes. Every Monday, there's an interview, and every Wednesday, there is a shorter solo episode where I will go into one of the topics that we discussed in the interview. Also relates back a little bit to that Monday episode. Mm-hmm. And then we have a break in between seasons. And I think for many, many businesses, this is a really cool way to podcast, but not having to do it all the time.
Right. I totally agree. I've kind of played around with different things where I'll take breaks and then roll into another season. I'm not as systematic as that, as far as, each season is 22 episodes. I do like that though. How many seasons do you have a year? 2 or 3?
Yeah, that's what I'm figuring out now.
Okay.
So the cool thing is also with working in seasons, I can always change things. It's like this really natural moment to make changes. So I'm figuring that out now at the moment. We just literally last week finished season 5, which started. So this year we'll have 3 seasons. Yes, that is true. For next year, I'm not sure. I'm thinking about doing 2 seasons, but it also really depends on how busy we are, what other projects I'm working on. So that's pretty cool that you can also choose. And I also want to say that now we have over 100 episodes. So there is a lot of content out there already produced by us. I'm also thinking of bringing back more of these previous episodes, because no one scrolls to episode 3 or 4 when there is more than 100 episodes. I'm also going to be a little bit smart at repurposing content.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And matter of fact, that's what I'm going to do over the next, probably as I roll into season 5, is to go back to some older episodes that really has great content, really great information that people can use. But like you said, no one's going back that far to listen to those episodes. So tell me a little bit about, how do you help your clients monetize their podcasts?
Yeah, my favorite topic, podcast monetization. So how we help clients is, first of all, I think the question is, how do you want to monetize your podcast? And the reason why I say this, it sounds obvious, but there are so many ways to monetize podcasts. usually the first thing that people think of is sponsorships.
Mm-hmm.
You just flip a switch somewhere on a platform and then there is a random ad in your podcast. That is definitely a way to monetize podcasts, but you need a lot of downloads or listeners before that becomes profitable. And I'm personally not a huge fan of this way or like strategy to monetize podcasts because it's a random ad. For your listener, they're listening to your episode and then they get interrupted by this super random thing that they're probably not interested in. I don't recommend this. There are other ways to monetize a podcast that can be really a win-win for all the parties involved, including the listener. For example, selling your own products or services, creating premium content, so extra episodes, bonus episodes that are behind a paywall. You can create a community for your podcast where people pay as a membership, so they pay a monthly fee and then they can chat with everyone else, and you can do live Q&As. I don't know, like there's so many things you can do. But also, I'm a fan of podcast sponsorships, even though like that older model of random ads and then you usually get paid per 1,000 downloads is usually what they look at. That's a lot of downloads. It's per episode, right? So that is, I mean, for my podcast, I have 2 podcasts. For both of my podcasts, I do not get 1,000 downloads per episode, but I do have sponsorships, and I do that by just being in direct contact with my sponsors, so with the brands, and we set up a campaign and I make sure that it is relevant, that my audience is relevant to this brand, and also that the brand is relevant to my listeners. So that is, I think, how you can create a win-win situation, and how you can also charge way more than when it's a random ad and they need thousands and thousands of downloads.
Right. I agree. One of my businesses is like probably one of the biggest sponsors of this podcast, because it just makes sense. For the business honestly pays for any of the stuff that has to be done for the podcast, the editing that we currently do and all of that. The business is paying for it. So it only makes sense that it's one of the biggest sponsors, but it's very helpful to have that as an option. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. Tell me a little bit, Anne, about your business. As far as, I know you started Podcast Babes in 2020, which was, an interesting year to start any business. But how's it been going? And tell me what your biggest wins have been so far.
Oh, yeah. It's going well now, but it has definitely been an experience. Let me put it like that. Yeah. So the Podcast Babes was born in 2020 at the end of the year, in the fourth quarter of the year. And before that, I was doing my freelance thing just under my own name. When I switched and like pivoted and rebranded, renamed my business, and I became the Podcast Babes, it was tough. I expected, okay, like these people, they already know me. Like people have been following me on socials, and I don't know, I already have clients. So I just continue the marketing or something. I don't know. But by creating a whole new brand, actually no one knew who I was. Like, even though I thought, okay, like people just see that it's still me, right? But that just didn't work. So I had to start marketing kind of from zero, and I didn't expect that. The start was actually really, really tough. What I did is I just created a lot of content. And now that is really nice, because now we're busier with clients. Luckily, that was also time at some point to get busier with clients' content instead of creating our own. But I'm really glad that I did that, because now we can sit back a little bit more and enjoy all the content that we created previously. So like I mentioned, like we have over 100 episodes on the podcast now, which is great because it's there forever, and we can repurpose it also forever. That means that now we don't really have to spend that much time creating new content. Well, we still do that, of course, but I'm really grateful for my past self for doing that.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes when we're starting businesses, we have a thought in our mind that it's just going to take off, right? Like you mentioned, people know me. I've been on social. I've been doing this for years as a freelancer. And then suddenly you actually start a business, and it's almost like crickets initially. But it's that snowball, it's kind of, you start with that little snowflake and then it just takes time. And it's hard to tell new business owners that because we so want to just go for it and get it done and see the dollars racking up really quickly, but it all just really takes time. But I'm glad to hear that it's doing really well for you now. What has been one of your biggest challenges since you've gotten over the hump? You have your clients now that are rolling. What's some of a challenge that you deal with today that you didn't some months ago,
Yeah. What we're working on right now is streamlining our systems and processes, because it's all fun when it works, but then when it doesn't work, when it falls apart, it really falls apart. That hasn't happened yet, but I would like to keep it that way. So we reached a point where things were going well, but I kind of hit a ceiling, as in, if more clients would come in, that would, I don't know if it would become a problem, but I was not confident enough that I could still guarantee the quality of the work. That is why now we're working on streamlining everything and just making sure that there is a super steady team who knows exactly what they need to do. Our project management is on point. Everyone meets deadlines. Everyone knows when deadlines are. And yeah, that's the current struggle to kind of make that next step.
Right.
So you're
ready to scale, but it's a matter of how do you do that and still keep that consistent quality of service?
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily about how to get the new clients, but more scaling comfortably.
Right.
Without everything. I don't want to freak out when there's all of a sudden a few more clients coming in. I want to be excited and confident. So that's what we're working on now. It's actually not really the sexy stuff, but it's just all the back end things.
Yeah, it's not the sexy stuff, but it has to be done if you want to grow your business, right? How are you going about doing that? Are you using systems for that? Or are you hiring more people? What's your steps for getting that done?
One, I think, very important step that we took is I went from a few freelance contractors in my team to, I don't want to say switched out, but we let go of 2 contractors. And instead, there is now a full-time employee in the business. So instead of 2 part-timers, we have now 1 full-timer, which I hope will be huge, because she will work at the Podcast Babes every day and she has no other job to go to, So I think that might make a change. Yeah, experimenting with that. And then also, I am a bit of a systems nerd. I really like clicking around in ClickUp and just making things better and streamlining all the project management stuff there. So that's another thing I'm really focusing and learning more about the tool. So I use ClickUp, but it doesn't matter, but just knowing exactly what I can do in the tool and then what works for my business and what doesn't. So also a lot of experimenting there.
Good. Well, yeah, I mean, that's just one of the things you've got to do if you want to scale your business. So let me ask you this, because I know that there's some people who listen to this podcast and they're business owners, and they probably are toying around with the idea of starting a podcast of their own. What things would you say they should consider before they jump into the world of podcasting?
Yeah, great question. I made all the rookie mistakes, so I can tell you exactly what not to do from experience. One thing that I see so many podcasters do, and again, this was 100% me. I started my podcast. I was super excited. And after, I think 7 episodes, it's exactly the average. I think it was 7 episodes. I got busy. I was doing other things. There was another shiny object, and I took a break from podcasting, and it was for 1 week and then another week and then a month. And then all of a sudden we were 6 months later. There was no new episode up, and nothing was happening, of course. And the main reason why that happened to me in my case, but I see that with many clients as well, is when you start a podcast, it's all new and exciting, and you see a certain amount of people listening to your podcast. It's new, so people are also excited. They want to check it out. But then after 1, 2, maybe 3 episodes, some people are just not necessarily interested anymore, or like they checked it out and it's not in their routine yet to actually listen every week or every whatever. So download numbers go down a little bit. And that was just, I was like, why am I doing this? Like, no one is listening. It's not growing. I've put in so much work and nothing is happening. That is what I was telling myself. Mm-hmm. So eventually I changed that mindset from no one is listening to I am doing this podcast because I enjoy it. I will just enjoy creating this content, and who wants to listen, listens. If no one wants to listen, fine by me. Then I had amazing conversations with these guests. And by doing that, it was so much easier to keep going. So when I started my podcast back up again, this was not the podcast-based podcast, by the way. I have another podcast and I started that one earlier. Once I started back up, it was just so fun. And because it was so fun, I could just keep going. And I've consistently released episodes for, I think it's 1.5 years now. And the cool thing is, by just releasing episodes for 1.5 years every single week and being extremely consistent, my podcast has grown a lot without much marketing, without doing any other, without focusing on marketing. And then after about a year, got my first sponsorship on the podcast. A brand approached me. So I didn't go out to look for sponsorships, but a brand approached me, and the founder was like, well, this is super interesting. You're talking exactly to the people I want to talk to. So can we do something together? Like, can we do a campaign together or whatever? And that is what we did. So then I also realized, like, hey, wait, something is definitely working, because I saw the numbers, like download numbers increase, and a brand wanted to partner up with me. So then I started to do a little bit more marketing stuff. I also got a website for the podcast. Like, I did not even have a website for the podcast. It was just on Buzzsprout. I just got their free website there, and it was fine for then. But then I got a little bit more professional maybe also, and went from there. Long story, very long story. My tip for people who start their podcast is, don't look at the numbers for the first few months, because it's not important. Commit to doing this for a while before you draw any conclusions. And honestly, the real magic of podcasting happens after a year at least of doing this. Until then, you just gotta enjoy the cool interviews, enjoy creating the content, and not look at the download numbers.
100% agree. Yeah. And I think for me, just having the occasional person that tells me, oh, that episode was so interesting, that episode answered something I've been thinking about. Those are the types of things that really keep me going and does make it really exciting. And I do really, really love talking to the guests. That is so much fun. Yeah. I learn a lot. And sometimes I'm a little bit selfish in the guests that I have, because there are people that I have questions for. You know, I want to ask. It's things I want to know about. So I figure if I want to know about, surely there are other people out in the world who wants to know about it too. It is a lot of fun. And I agree with you in that. Don't look at the numbers. It's just enjoy the ride, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you that sometimes it's also fine to be a little bit selfish with what guests you get on, because that makes it fun. Like, you have to make it fun for yourself, right?
Exactly. So Podcast Babes is everywhere. You can find it on every platform, I'm sure. And so you are going into, you said season 5? Or you're finishing up season 5?
Oh, no, I actually said season 5, right? No, we actually finished season 6. Sorry.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I said the wrong thing. We finished season 6 and I'm now recording for season 7.
Oh, that's fantastic. So do you do all of your recordings in a short period of time, or do you spread them out over the season? How do you do your work? Do you batch?
I love batching. Yes, absolutely. I also work well ahead. I am now, like, we already recorded, I would say, like half of season 7, and it will release 2 months from now. The first episode will release 2 months from now. We're working ahead, but that's also because I'll be traveling at the end of the year. I don't want to, well, I'll carry around my mic, but I don't know how like internet connection and all that thing, like all that stuff is going. So it's also now it's a little bit extreme. So usually I'll make sure that most of the season is recorded before the first episode goes live. Just because I don't want to stress myself out. I don't want to be in a situation where I need to record an episode right now.
Right.
I definitely had that experience where I just had that pressure of having to record, and that doesn't work for me. Like personally, I just like my mind goes blank. I cannot come up with anything, like any topics, any guests. So yeah, that doesn't really work for me. So I make sure that everything is ready to go, at least recorded. Like when the content is there and like the editing and all that stuff, we can do that while
that's your business. That's what you do.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm not worried about that, but just like recording, I have to be in my podcast room. I have to, and it's not an actual room, right? It's just like a space in my apartment, but I need my mic. I need good internet connection, like all that stuff. So I just want to make sure that the content is there, and then either me or my team can do all the post-production afterwards. But yeah, also a big tip, absolutely, see if batch recording works for you. And if not, like even just working well ahead, just like a few weeks in advance. Yeah, I would always recommend that, because life happens. Maybe you get sick, maybe your guest cancels. That happens a lot. I mean, we're all human. So It's better to just make sure that your release schedule doesn't have to suffer from that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm kind of the opposite of you, because I fly by the seat of my pants like all the time. But that's always been my personality too. Like if I had a test coming up, I usually study for it the night before. I didn't do it ahead. But I do love to do my interviews in batches, because I like to have them already recorded, and then I can kind of tweak how I want to release them. And, recently I had one guest mention that they bought into a franchise. Well, I had another guest who was a franchise broker. I didn't really realize that, but it was a great, pairing to put them kind of right after each other to talk about those topics. So I do enjoy doing my interviews batching, but then I'm last minute on everything else.
But I think it also makes sense, because for guest recordings, you're also depending on someone else, right? Who also has their own life, and they can also cancel or get sick, or I don't know. Yeah, at least you have that done, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Well, tell us where people can find you if they need to utilize your services. Tell us about your podcast that you have. Just tell the audience more about you.
Yeah. So you can go to thepodcastbabes.com, our website. There's everything there. You can listen to the Podcast Babes podcast. I think when this episode goes out, we might be in a season break, but then season 7 will come in October. And then there's a new episode twice a week. So that's super exciting. If you're looking for podcast management, or if you're looking for help finding a sponsorship for your podcast, then we can help you with that. So like I already mentioned, we don't do like random ads in your podcast, but what we do offer is finding a really cool partner to work with who can sponsor your podcast, which will be a good match. Like for everyone, we're looking for that win-win. So that's what we can also help you with. You can find all the info on the website, and we're also on all the socials, but there's also links to that on the website. So I think if you go to the website, you find it all.
You find it all. I love that. I love that. And so with helping people find sponsorships, I love the idea of it actually making sense and not a random ad. Because if you're talking about a specific topic, you don't want a random ad in your podcast. It needs to make sense for your audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really key. Yeah, that's definitely important. So podcast babes, when you say babes, I automatically just think women, but you are helping anyone, right? You don't have to be a babe.
Yes. Yes, you don't have to be a babe. We're all babes. It's fully female. Everyone in my business, everyone who creates a website, like everyone is a woman. That's why it's the Podcast Babes. But we also help male podcasters. You're also welcome to check out the website, of course.
Of course.
Yes, of course. So yeah, we don't discriminate or anything against male podcasters.
Come on over.
Yes.
You guys will take really good care of everybody. I love that, though. I love the fact that it is an all-female business, and that's absolutely wonderful. That's very exciting. Well, Anne, this has been great. Is there anything else you'd like people to just kind of know if they're considering podcasting, or are they already in podcasting, but just not quite getting where they want to be? Is there any last tidbit of info you'd like to leave someone?
Well, we already mentioned it, but just want to repeat to enjoy the ride. I think you said it so well, Monica. Enjoy the ride, enjoy creating the content, and give it time also. Like, give it some time, enjoy it, and all the good things will happen. And if you need some help to keep enjoying it, like if you don't like editing and show notes and all that stuff, then find someone who can help you. Maybe the Podcast Babes, or maybe someone else, but that can also make sure that you can also keep having fun creating the content.
I love that. Keep having fun. Yeah. Absolutely love it. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Monica. This was super fun.
Thanks. Thanks, Anne, for being a guest on the podcast and encouraging others to consider starting one of their own. I will say one of the things that I absolutely love about podcasting is the opportunity that it gives me to meet other entrepreneurs. And with other people that I've spoken with in the past who have either been on podcasts or who have a podcast, you often get the opportunity to connect with other people in your industry. This can help you connect with others in your industry so it doesn't seem like you're making a sales pitch or you're just making a cold call, but you're actually giving them an opportunity to talk about their business, to make a connection with you, and perhaps this can actually help your business or open a door that would have been more difficult to get into. It can also serve as a way to show your knowledge, to show your expertise, and to show what it is that your company provides. For example, I was recently on a podcast called One Next Step. This podcast is put on by Belay Solutions, and Belay Solutions provide virtual assistant services to business owners. The great thing about this is Belay and One Next Step, they're providing educational information to entrepreneurs and business owners who are listening to the podcast. But throughout the podcast, we're learning what Belay Solutions offers. So who are you going to think of if you need a virtual assistant? If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably going to think of Belay first before you look at anyone else. So it's a win-win for them. Truth be told, we all have knowledge and a story to share. So perhaps a podcast is not the way for everyone, but perhaps it is a book, a blog, or an article in your local newspaper. But there's something that you can use to connect with people in your industry or people that you want to serve. Speaking of books, though, don't miss next week's Boss Up Books episode. The foundations of this book has changed my life, so don't miss it. On October 22nd here in Atlanta, I will be hosting my first in-person class around starting your own business called The Freedom Formula. I will share with you the steps I took to create a side hustle, ultimately jumping into full-time business ownership and a life that I love. If you or someone you know is interested in joining me, you can go to my website, monicaallen.com/freedom formula and get signed up. The link is in the show notes as well. Because this is a passion of mine, the cost is minimal and space is limited. I really want to give time to all of the participants to discuss the details of your business idea and help you truly grow your business. Also, as some of you may know, legacy is my life word. Since that is the case, I have decided that the price of the ticket for the course will include an extra ticket for a child or sibling between the ages of 12 and 18. So again, go to monicaallen.com/freedom formula to learn more. Thanks for listening to the Become Your Own Boss podcast. I'm Monica Allen. Join me on Instagram and TikTok for continued daily tips and inspiration around starting and growing your business. Both handles are at Become Your Own Boss podcast. Also, if you don't mind, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you have a couple of extra minutes, actually write and leave preferably a 5-star review for the podcast. I would also love it if you would share it. Pass it on to someone else. You can send a message, send this episode via text message. You can also just share it on your social media. And if you subscribe to the podcast, you will always know when the next episode is available. Now is the time. Now is the time to level up, leave a legacy, and become your own boss.